Months passed, and the colony slowly began to rebuild. The dome was repaired, its cracks sealed with reinforced materials scavenged from abandoned structures. Life on HFY remained hard, but there was a new sense of purpose among the settlers. They had faced death and survived. Nathan stood at the edge of the settlement, staring out at the barren landscape. The mutated figures that once haunted the colony were gone, driven away by the storm, or succumbed to their own uncontrollable growth. He often wondered what had become of them, whether they had found peace in the wilds or perished under the planet's relentless wrath. Either way, he hoped they were no longer suffering. Laura joined him moments later, holding 2 cups of warm tea. She handed one to Nathan without a word, her presence comforting in its familiarity. They stood side by side, watching the horizon as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked ground. "Do you think we'll ever leave this place?" Laura asked after a while, breaking the silence. Nathan took a sip of his tea, the warmth spreading through his chest. "Maybe," he said thoughtfully. "But even if we do, I don't think we'll ever be the same." She nodded, understanding what he meant. HFY had changed them, all of them. Their bodies were stronger now, their bones denser and more resilient thanks to the stabilizing compound. But it wasn't just physical changes, it was deeper than that. The planet had tested their limits, forced them to adapt, and left an indelible mark on their spirits. Inside the colony, life had settled into a fragile rhythm. The settlers worked together, pooling resources and skills to keep the community alive. Ryan and his group, once so distrustful of Nathan and Laura, had begun to contribute more openly, though tensions still lingered beneath the surface. Trust was slow to rebuild, but progress was being made. At the center of it all was the lab, now repurposed as both a medical facility and a research hub. Laura spent most of her days there, refining the compound and studying its long-term effects. So far, the results were promising. Those who had been treated showed no signs of relapse, and their enhanced strength proved invaluable for survival. But she knew the work was far from over. There were still questions to answer, mysteries to unravel, and dangers yet unknown. Nathan, meanwhile, focused on documenting everything they had learned. He wrote detailed reports about the mutations, the compound, and the planet itself, hoping that someday someone beyond HFY would read them. Earth felt like a distant memory now, its promises of rescue fading into legend. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's future lay not in looking back, but in moving forward. As night fell, the colony grew quiet, its inhabitants retreating to their quarters for rest. Nathan and Laura stayed outside a little longer, savoring the rare moment of calm. The wind whispered around them, carrying with it the faint scent of minerals and dust. "We've come a long way," Laura said softly, her voice tinged with pride. "But there's still so much we don't know." "True," Nathan replied. "And maybe we never will. But that's okay. Survival isn't about having all the answers. It's about finding a way to keep going." They turned and walked back toward the dome, their footsteps steady despite the weight of the past. Inside, lights flickered warmly, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness outside. The colony was far from perfect, but it was home, a testament to resilience, determination, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of adversity. As Nathan lay down to sleep that night, he thought about Earth and the people who had sent them here without warning or care. He wondered if they would recognize the settlers now, if they would see the strength etched into every scar, every bone. And then he realized it didn't matter. Whoever they had been before, they were something new now, something stronger. Somewhere deep inside, Nathan smiled. For better or worse, they belonged to HFY now. And perhaps, one day, the planet might belong to them too. The colony's makeshift infirmary was crowded, the air thick with tension, and the sharp scent of antiseptics. Nathan and Laura moved from cot to cot, administering doses of the stabilizing compound as quickly as they could. Some settlers lay still, their bodies too weak to fight any longer, while others sat upright, clutching vials like lifelines. Every face carried a mix of hope and fear. Hope that the treatment would work, and fear that it might be too late. "We're running low," Laura said, her voice tight as she checked the dwindling supply. "If we don't find a way to make more, we'll run out before everyone gets treated." Nathan nodded, his jaw clenched in determination. "We'll figure something out. We have to." He glanced around the room, taking stock of the situation. The mutated figures had been pushed back for now, thanks to Ryan and his group holding the line at the dome's breach. But the cost had been high. Several settlers had fallen during the fight, their bodies broken or lost to the storm outside. The colony was battered, its resources stretched thin, but there was a fragile sense of order beginning to take hold. Sarah approached them, her hands trembling as she held out an empty vial. This stopped the pain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what happens next? Will I go back to normal?" Laura placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "It's not about going back," she said gently. "It's about surviving. The mutations are dangerous, but if we can control them, you'll be stronger than ever." Sarah nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. She wasn't alone. Many settlers struggled to reconcile the changes happening to their bodies with the promise of survival. For some, the idea of being fixed felt like losing a part of themselves. For others, it was the only hope they had left. As the day wore on, Nathan and Laura worked tirelessly to synthesize more of the compound. They scavenged every available resource, mixing chemicals and plant extracts in a desperate attempt to stretch their supplies. It was slow, painstaking work, but each new batch brought a glimmer of hope. By nightfall, the colony was quieter, though far from calm. The mutated figures outside had retreated into the shadows, their movements sluggish under the weight of the storm. Settlers huddled together, tending to the wounded and mourning those they had lost. Ryan appeared in the doorway of the lab, his face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. "You've done good work," he admitted grudgingly, leaning against the frame. "I didn't think it would work." "It's not over yet," Nathan replied, his tone measured but firm. "We need to stabilize everyone who's been affected. And then we need to figure out how to prevent this from happening again." Ryan nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "And after that? What then? Do we stay here, fighting this planet every step of the way, or do we leave?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Leaving Xerath 7 wasn't an option. Not yet. The colony's ships were damaged beyond repair, and Earth hadn't sent a rescue mission in years. Survival meant staying, no matter how brutal the planet was. Laura stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fatigue etched on her face. "For now, we focus on today, one step at a time." Ryan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit corridor. Nathan watched him go, his thoughts heavy with the challenges ahead. As the hours passed, the number of untreated settlers dwindled. Those who had received the compound began showing signs of improvement. Their breathing eased, their pain subsided, and the uncontrollable bone growth slowed to a halt. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. But Nathan knew the battle wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Trust had been shattered, alliances tested, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. Rebuilding the colony would take more than medicine. It would take unity. When dawn broke over Xerath 7, the storm had weakened, leaving behind an eerie calm. Nathan stood by the window, watching the horizon. The planet was harsh, unrelenting, and unforgiving. But so were its people. Together, they had faced the worst it could throw at them and lived to tell the tale. "We'll get through this," Laura said softly, joining him. "We always do." Nathan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe her. The colony was in chaos. The crack in the dome had widened, and a steady stream of toxic air seeped into the settlement. Settlers scrambled to seal the breach with metal plates and sealant, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. The mutated figures outside continued their assault, slamming against the weakened structure with terrifying force. Time was running out. Nathan and Laura moved quickly through the crowd, carrying cases of the stabilizing compound. They handed vials to anyone who would take them, explaining how to administer the doses. Some settlers accepted the treatment without question, while others hesitated, their trust in science shaken by fear and desperation. Ryan stood nearby, watching silently as his group worked to reinforce the dome. "You're wasting your time," he called out when Nathan approached him. "This isn't going to fix anything." "It's already working," Nathan shot back, his voice firm despite the tension in the air. "Alex is stable. We can stop the mutations if people just give us a chance." Ryan shook his head, his expression hard. "Even if it works, it doesn't change the truth. This planet will kill us all eventually. Maybe it's better to let nature take its course." Before Nathan could respond, a deafening crash echoed through the colony. One section of the dome collapsed entirely, sending shards of glass flying. Toxic winds rushed in, forcing everyone to retreat further inside. The mutated figures surged forward, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the storm. Panic spread like wildfire as settlers realized the barrier between them and death had been breached. Laura grabbed Nathan's arm, pulling him toward the medical bay. "We need to protect the compound," she said urgently. "If we lose it, we lose everything." They barricaded themselves inside, sealing the door behind them. The room was small but stocked with supplies, enough to keep working for a little longer. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the chaos unfolding outside. Settlers fought to hold back the invaders, using whatever weapons they could find. Screams filled the air, mingling with the howl of the storm. "We can't stay here," Nathan said, pacing the room. "We have to get the treatment to more people." "And do what?" Laura asked, her voice strained. "Walk out there and hand it to them. We'll be torn apart before we take 2 steps." Nathan clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. She was right. They were trapped. But giving up wasn't an option. He glanced at the ventilation shaft in the corner of the room, an idea forming in his mind. "Follow me," he said, grabbing a flashlight. Laura hesitated but nodded, following him as he pried open the vent. Once again, they crawled through the narrow ducts, the sound of the storm fading behind them. This time, their destination was the colony's central control room, a place where they could broadcast instructions to the entire settlement. When they reached the control room, they found it empty, the screens flickering with static. Nathan quickly set to work, rebooting the systems and activating the colony-wide intercom. His voice rang out over the speakers, cutting through the noise. "This is Nathan speaking," he began, his tone calm but urgent. "Listen carefully. We've developed a treatment that stops the mutations. It's safe and it works. If you want to survive, come to the medical bay. Bring anyone who needs help." For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, settlers began to move toward the medical bay, carrying injured friends and family members. Laura stayed behind to distribute the compound while Nathan returned to the lab, searching for ways to produce more. Every available surface was soon covered with vials, each one a lifeline for those still fighting. Outside, the battle raged on. The mutated figures pushed deeper into the colony, their numbers overwhelming. Ryan and his group fought valiantly, holding the line long enough for others to escape. But even as the tide turned slightly in their favor, Nathan knew the fight wasn't over. Back in the lab, Laura joined him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "We're running out of supplies." Nathan looked at her, his expression resolute. "Then we'll make more. We have to." As they worked side by side, the colony teetered on the edge of survival. The cost of their defiance was high, but so was the price of surrender. For now, all they could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time. The lab was a flurry of activity as Nathan and Laura worked tirelessly to refine the stabilizing compound. The threat outside the dome loomed large, but they couldn't afford distractions, not when lives depended on their progress. Every second counted, and they knew it. Nathan stood over a microscope, adjusting the focus as he studied a fresh batch of samples. "The bone growth is slowing in some of the volunteers," he said, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "But it's not stopping completely." Laura nodded, her hands busy mixing chemicals at the counter behind him. "We need to adjust the formula," she replied. "Maybe increase the concentration of the stabilizer." As they worked, the tension in the colony grew palpable. Outside the dome, the mutated figures continued their relentless assault, pounding against the glass with unnatural strength. Cracks spread further across the surface, and the settlers scrambled to reinforce it with whatever materials they could find. Ryan and his group were among those working to hold the line, though their distrust of Nathan and Laura lingered. "We can't keep this up forever," Sarah said, stepping into the lab. Her face was pale, and dark circles ringed her eyes from lack of sleep. "If the dome breaks, we're done for." Nathan looked up from his work, his expression grim. "Then we better make sure that doesn't happen." Sarah hesitated, then moved closer. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Laura glanced at her, grateful for the offer. "We need more plant extracts from the storage bay," she said. "They're marked with green labels. Bring back as much as you can carry." Sarah nodded and hurried out, leaving Nathan and Laura alone again. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant thud of fists against the dome. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Laura asked suddenly, her voice soft but strained. Nathan paused, setting down the sample he had been examining. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Ryan's right? What if these mutations are supposed to happen? Maybe we're fighting against something we don't fully understand." Nathan shook his head firmly. "This isn't evolution, Laura. It's destruction. If we let it run its course, it'll kill us all. We have no choice but to fight it." Laura didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the vial of compound in front of her. Finally, she nodded. "You're right. We can't give up now." Hours passed in a blur of calculations and adjustments. When Sarah returned with the plant extracts, Nathan and Laura wasted no time incorporating them into the formula. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized after days of practice. Slowly but surely, the new version of the compound began to take shape. By late evening, they were ready to test it. Alex, one of the original volunteers, stepped forward without hesitation. His trust in Nathan and Laura never wavered, even when others doubted them. Laura administered the updated dose carefully, her hand steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "We'll monitor you closely," Nathan said, placing a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "Let us know if you feel anything unusual." Alex nodded, sitting down on a nearby cot. For the next hour, they watched and waited, scanning his body for any changes. At first, nothing seemed different, but then Alex spoke. "It feels lighter," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Like the pressure in my bones is gone." Nathan and Laura exchanged a glance, hope flickering in their eyes. Scans confirmed what Alex described. The abnormal bone growth had stopped entirely. Not only that, but the existing deformities were beginning to stabilize. "It's working," Laura whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's really working." But their relief was short-lived. A loud crash echoed through the colony, shaking the walls of the lab. The dome had finally cracked under the strain, and the air inside began to thin. Alarms blared, and panic erupted as settlers scrambled to seal the breach. "We need to get this compound to everyone," Nathan said urgently, grabbing the case of vials. "Now." Laura nodded, her determination unwavering. Together, they rushed out of the lab, knowing the battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, they had a weapon to fight back with. The darkness in the lab felt suffocating. Nathan paced back and forth, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the shadows as he tried to think of a way out. Laura stayed near the equipment, her mind racing. The power outage wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Without electricity, the delicate samples they had been working on could spoil, and the stabilizing compound might be ruined. "We need to get the power back on," Nathan said finally, stopping in front of the sealed door. "If Ryan thinks we're giving up that easily, he's wrong." Laura nodded, though her expression was grim. "But how? He's got people guarding the entrance. We can't exactly walk out there and reason with them." Nathan hesitated, then glanced at the ventilation shaft in the corner of the room. It was small, but it might be their only chance. "We'll go through the vents," he said. "It's risky, but it's better than sitting here waiting for something worse to happen." Laura didn't argue. She trusted Nathan, even if the plan sounded desperate. Together, they dragged a stool over to the vent and pried it open with a crowbar. The metal screeched loudly, making them both wince, but there was no time to worry about noise. One by one, they climbed into the narrow duct, the cold metal pressing against their bodies as they crawled forward. The journey through the vents was slow and uncomfortable. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe, and the sharp edges of the metal scraped against their hands and knees. But they pushed on, driven by the knowledge that every second counted. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached an opening that led into the colony's main generator room. Nathan dropped down first, landing softly on the floor below. Laura followed, clutching the flashlight tightly. The generator hummed faintly, its systems still intact but offline. Nathan moved quickly, flipping switches and reconnecting wires while Laura kept watch. Her heart pounded as she listened for any sign of Ryan or his group, but the room remained eerily quiet. "Got it," Nathan said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. The lights flickered back on, bathing the room in a soft glow. The hum of machinery returned, and with it, a sense of relief. But their victory was short-lived. As they made their way back to the lab, they found the colony in chaos. Strange figures lurked outside the dome, their silhouettes distorted by the thick glass walls. These weren't the usual predators of HFY 7. They were human, or at least they used to be. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their bones growing uncontrollably until they pierced through skin and muscle. They moved with jerky, unnatural motions, their eyes hollow and devoid of reason. "What are they doing here?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "They must have been exiled," Nathan replied, his tone grim. "When the mutations got too bad, the colony abandoned them. Now they've come back." One of the figures slammed its fist against the dome, the impact sending cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. Panic spread among the settlers, who scrambled to reinforce the structure. Nathan and Laura exchanged a glance, knowing they couldn't waste time. If the dome failed, everyone inside would be at the mercy of the mutated outsiders and the storm beyond. "We need to finish the treatment," Laura said firmly. "If we can stabilize the bone growth in the volunteers, we might stand a chance." Nathan nodded, determination hardening his features. "Then let's get to work." As they returned to the lab, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on them. The colony was under siege, not just from the planet, but from itself. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, Nathan and Laura clung to one truth: giving up wasn't an option. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The colony was tense, the air thick with unease. Word had spread about Daniel's collapse, and now everyone seemed to be watching one another, waiting for signs of the next victim. Nathan and Laura worked quietly in the lab, their movements deliberate as they prepared to test the experimental compound on a small group of volunteers. But not everyone shared their hope. Ryan, a burly engineer with a sharp temper, stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was unreadable, but his stance made it clear he wasn't pleased. "You really think this is going to work?" he asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Nathan looked up from the vials he was organizing. "We won't know unless we try," he said calmly, though his jaw tightened slightly. He'd dealt with Ryan's resistance before, but the man's growing influence among the settlers worried him. Ryan scoffed, shaking his head. And what if it doesn't? What if you make things worse? Some of us don't want to gamble our lives on your experiments. Laura stepped forward, her tone firm but measured. Doing nothing isn't an option, Ryan. People are dying. If we wait too long, more will follow. Ryan glared at her, his frustration boiling over. Maybe that's just how it has to be. Maybe these changes are meant to happen. Look at us. We're stronger than we've ever been. Those bones aren't a curse. They're a gift. A gift that kills. Nathan shot back, his patience wearing thin. You can't ignore the facts, Ryan. This isn't evolution, it's mutation. And if we don't stop it, it'll destroy us all. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Ryan stared at Nathan for a long moment before turning to leave, muttering under his breath. As the door slid shut behind him, Laura let out a heavy sigh. He's not wrong about one thing, she said softly. Some people see this as progress. They think being stronger makes them better suited for HFY 7. But they're wrong, Nathan replied, setting the vials down on the table. Strength without control is useless. We can't survive like this, not in the long run. Despite the argument, they pressed on with their preparations. By morning, they had gathered a small group of volunteers willing to try the compound. Among them was Sarah, the young woman who had discovered the metallic device near the perimeter. Her hands trembled slightly as Laura administered the first dose, but her expression remained determined. "We trust you," she said simply, offering a weak smile. Hours passed as they monitored the volunteers, checking for any changes in their condition. At first, there were no visible effects, and Nathan began to fear the compound might not work. But then, something shifted. One of the volunteers, a man named Alex, reported feeling less pain in his joints, where bone growth had previously caused discomfort. Scans confirmed that the treatment was slowing the abnormal growth, stabilizing his skeletal structure. "It's working," Laura whispered, her voice filled with cautious relief. She turned to Nathan, her eyes shining. "It's actually working." But their celebration was short-lived. Later that evening, alarms blared through the colony once again. This time, it wasn't a medical emergency, it was sabotage. The power supply to the lab flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Equipment shut down, and the hum of the generators faded into silence. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, panic rising in her voice. Nathan grabbed a flashlight and moved quickly toward the control panel. "Someone cut the power," he said grimly. Ryan appeared moments later, flanked by a few others who shared his distrust of the scientists. "This ends now," he declared, his voice cold. "If you won't let nature take its course, we'll make sure you can't interfere." Laura stepped forward, her anger outweighing her fear. "You're making a mistake, Ryan. This isn't about control, it's about survival." Ryan didn't respond. Instead, he motioned for his group to block the entrance, leaving Nathan and Laura trapped inside the powerless lab. As the door sealed shut, Nathan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. "They don't understand," he muttered, looking around at the darkened equipment. "No," Laura agreed, her voice steady despite the situation. "But we can't give up. Not now." Outside, the wind howled against the dome, as if mocking their struggle. Inside, the battle for the future of HFY 7 had only just begun. Nathan sat alone in the dimly lit lab, staring at the strange metallic device they had found near the perimeter. The hum of the colony's generators buzzed faintly in the background, but his mind was elsewhere. His fingers traced the markings on the object, trying to make sense of its purpose. It wasn't natural. That much was clear, but what it meant for the settlers of HFY 7 terrified him. Laura walked in a few moments later, carrying a stack of files she had pulled from the colony's archives. Her face was pale, and there was a heaviness in her steps that hadn't been there before. She set the files down on the table with a soft thud and looked at Nathan. "I think you need to see this," she said quietly. Nathan glanced up, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" She opened one of the files, revealing faded documents and grainy images. These were sent by Earth's governing council years ago, before communication stopped. They're classified reports about experiments. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes scanning the pages. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The reports detailed plans to test genetic modifications on human subjects in extreme environments. Xerath 7 had been chosen as the perfect location, a remote, inhospitable world where no one would ask questions. The goal was to create super soldiers capable of surviving any battlefield, with bones stronger than steel and bodies resistant to injury. But something went wrong. Laura continued, her voice trembling slightly. The experiments spiraled out of control. Instead of controlled enhancements, the mutations became unpredictable. That's why they abandoned the project. And us. Nathan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "They left us here knowing this could happen," he said, his voice low and bitter. "They used us as guinea pigs." Laura nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "And now we're paying the price." The weight of the discovery settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Everything made sense. The unbreakable skeletons, the uncontrollable bone growth, the deaths. It wasn't just the planet or some random environmental factor. This was man-made, a twisted legacy of Earth's greed and ambition. "We have to tell the others," Nathan said after a long silence. "No," Laura replied sharply. "Not yet. If people find out about this, they'll panic. We don't need more fear right now. We need solutions." Nathan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She was right. Telling the settlers the truth might shatter whatever fragile hope they still clung to. For now, they had to focus on finding a way to stop the mutations. As they sifted through the documents, Nathan noticed something unusual, a list of chemical compounds marked as stabilizers. According to the notes, these compounds were designed to counteract the effects of the mutations if administered early enough. "Could these be the key?" he asked, pointing to the list. Laura studied the compounds carefully. "Maybe," she said, "but we'd need to synthesize them first. And even then, there's no guarantee it'll work." "It's better than nothing," Nathan insisted. "We have to try." Over the next few hours, they worked tirelessly, using the colony's limited resources to recreate the stabilizers. The process was slow and painstaking, requiring precise measurements and constant adjustments. Outside, the wind howled against the dome, a reminder of the hostile world waiting beyond their fragile sanctuary. Finally, late into the night, they had a small vial of liquid, a potential antidote. Laura held it up to the light, her hand steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "This might save us," she whispered, "or it might kill us." Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't know unless we try." As they prepared to test the compound, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a precipice. The truth about Xerath 7 was ugly, but it also gave them a chance to fight back against the forces that had shaped their fate. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The storm finally began to die down, leaving behind a thick layer of dust that clung to every surface inside the dome. Nathan wiped his hands on a cloth as he walked back into the lab, his face drawn with exhaustion. Laura was already there, hunched over her notes, her pen moving quickly across the paper. Neither of them had slept much during the night, but neither dared to stop working, not when the clock was ticking. "Anything new?" Nathan asked, pulling up a chair beside her. Laura looked up briefly, then shook her head. "Nothing concrete yet," she admitted. "But I've been thinking about Jake's symptoms. The uncontrollable bone growth. It doesn't just happen overnight. There has to be a trigger." Nathan nodded slowly. "You're right. It's probably cumulative. Over time, exposure builds up until the body can't handle it anymore." As they spoke, The door to the lab slid open, and a young woman named Sarah stepped inside. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she held out a small device. "We found this near the perimeter," she said quietly. It was buried in the soil. Nathan took the device from her and examined it closely. It was small and metallic, its surface covered in strange markings. He pressed a button on the side, and a faint hum filled the room. Laura leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she studied the object. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with unease. "I'm not sure," Nathan replied, "but it looks man-made." The discovery sent a chill through the room. Everyone knew Earth's governing council had stopped sending supplies years ago, cutting off communication entirely. If this device came from Earth, it raised troubling questions no one wanted to answer. Laura carefully placed the object under a scanner, running diagnostics to determine its purpose. As the machine worked, she turned to Nathan. "Do you think this could be connected to the mutations?" "It's possible," he said after a moment. "If someone was experimenting with genetic modifications here." He didn't finish the thought, but Laura understood. The implications were staggering. If Earth had used Xerath-7 as a testing ground for dangerous experiments, the settlers weren't just fighting against the planet. They were fighting against something far more sinister. The scanner beeped, interrupting their conversation. Laura glanced at the results, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "This isn't good," she murmured. "What is it?" Nathan asked, leaning closer. "It's emitting low-level radiation," she explained. "And the mineral composition matches what we found in Jake's bones." Sarah gasped softly, stepping back instinctively. "So, this thing caused it." "Not directly," Laura said, "but it might have introduced something into the environment, a catalyst for the mutations." Nathan clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. "We need to find out who put it there, and why." Before anyone could respond, another alarm blared through the colony. This time, it wasn't a storm warning. The sound was sharper, more urgent. Nathan and Laura exchanged a glance before rushing toward the source of the commotion. When they arrived, they found chaos unfolding. A group of settlers stood gathered around a stretcher, their faces pale with fear. On the stretcher lay a man named Daniel, his body racked with spasms. His arms and legs were grotesquely swollen. The skin stretched tight over bulging ridges beneath. "He collapsed while working outside," one of the settlers explained. "We tried to stabilize him, but—" Nathan knelt beside Daniel, checking his vitals. The man was still conscious, though barely. His breathing was shallow, and sweat poured down his face. Laura joined him, her hands moving quickly as she assessed the damage. "It's happening again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just like with Jake." Daniel groaned, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. "It hurts," he managed to say before slipping into unconsciousness. Nathan clenched his jaw, anger and helplessness warring within him. They couldn't keep losing people like this, not without answers. As the settlers carried Daniel away, Laura grabbed Nathan's arm, her grip tight. "We're running out of time," she said urgently. "If we don't figure this out soon, more people will die." Nathan nodded, his resolve hardening. Whatever was causing these mutations, they had to stop it, no matter the cost. The wind howled outside the thick glass walls of the colony dome, carrying with it a fine mist of toxic particles. Nathan stood by the window, staring out at the desolate landscape. The ground was cracked and barren, littered with jagged rocks that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. In the distance, a pack of predators moved like shadows, their glowing eyes reflecting faintly in the dim light. This was Xerath-7, a place where survival was never guaranteed. Laura joined him a moment later, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You've been quiet," she said, her tone gentle but probing. Nathan didn't turn to look at her. "I keep thinking about Jake," he admitted. "What if we can't figure this out in time? What if more people start changing like he did?" Laura sighed, sipping her drink before setting it aside. "We don't have the luxury of giving up," she replied firmly. "If we don't try, no one else will." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. They both knew the stakes. Xerath 7 wasn't just dangerous, it was relentless. Every day brought new challenges, from the planet's crushing gravity to its unpredictable weather patterns. Settlers had learned to adapt quickly, relying on advanced technology and sheer willpower to endure. But now something deeper was happening, something beyond their control. "Do you think it's the environment?" Laura asked after a pause. Could the planet itself be causing these changes? Nathan finally turned away from the window, his expression thoughtful. "It's possible," he said. "The atmosphere here is unlike anything we've encountered before. High levels of radiation, strange mineral deposits in the soil. Maybe our bodies are reacting to all of it. But why only some people?" Laura pressed. "Why not everyone?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Nathan replied. He gestured toward the lab equipment set up nearby. "We need to run more tests. Maybe there's something specific triggering the mutations, something environmental or genetic." As they discussed possibilities, a loud alarm blared through the colony, startling them both. Red lights flashed along the ceiling, signaling an emergency. Without hesitation, they rushed toward the source of the commotion, an observation post near the edge of the dome. When they arrived, a crowd had already gathered. A group of settlers stood around a large view screen showing live footage from outside. On the screen, a massive storm was brewing, its swirling clouds tinged with eerie shades of green and purple. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the twisted shapes of trees bent under the weight of the wind. "It's heading straight for us," someone muttered nervously. Nathan exchanged a glance with Laura. Storms like this were common on Xerath 7, but they were rarely this intense. The domes were built to withstand extreme conditions, but even the strongest structures had limits. "We should prepare for impact," Nathan said loudly, addressing the group. "Secure anything loose inside the dome and double-check the seals." The settlers nodded and dispersed quickly, each person knowing their role in keeping the colony safe. As the others worked, Nathan and Laura returned to the lab to monitor the situation. They couldn't afford distractions, not when lives depended on their research. Hours passed as the storm raged outside. The sound of debris hitting the dome echoed through the halls, mingling with the hum of generators working overtime. Inside the lab, Nathan studied data from earlier tests, while Laura prepared samples for further analysis. "This could explain it," Nathan said suddenly, pointing to a graph on one of the monitors. "Look at the mineral composition in the soil. It matches traces we found in Jake's tissue." Laura leaned closer, her eyes scanning the numbers. "So the ground itself might be influencing the bone growth?" she asked. "It's a theory," Nathan admitted, "but it makes sense. If settlers are exposed to these minerals over time, their bodies could start incorporating them into their bones, making them stronger, denser, and eventually deadly," Laura finished grimly. The realization weighed heavily on both of them. Outside, the storm showed no signs of easing. Inside, the race against time continued. For now, all they could do was keep working and hope they weren't too late. Nathan adjusted the microscope for what felt like the 100th time that day. The dim light of the lab cast long shadows across the metallic surfaces, but he didn't notice. His focus was entirely on the sample in front of him, a thin slice of bone extracted from a settler who had been born on Xerath 7. Laura stood nearby, her arms crossed as she watched him work. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Nathan hesitated before answering. He leaned back slightly, rubbing his temples. "It's strange," he said finally. "The density is off the charts. It's denser than anything I've ever seen in human bone structure." Laura moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the screen displaying the magnified image. Her brow furrowed as she studied the intricate patterns within the tissue. "It looks almost synthetic," she murmured. "But it's not. This is completely organic. For weeks, they had been hearing rumors about settlers developing unusual physical traits. People spoke of broken bones healing overnight or injuries that seemed to vanish without scars. At first, everyone dismissed it as exaggeration, just another tale spun by those desperate to find meaning in their harsh new home. But then came reports of something darker. Settlers collapsing suddenly, their bodies failing under some unknown strain. That was when Nathan and Laura decided to investigate. HFY 7 was no ordinary planet. Known among Earth's colonies as deathworld, it tested every ounce of human resilience. Crushing gravity made even simple tasks exhausting, while violent storms swept across its barren landscape with little warning. Predatory creatures lurked everywhere, their sharp claws and teeth capable of tearing through metal. Surviving here required more than just determination. It demanded innovation, strength, and sometimes sheer luck. Yet, despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the settlers were changing, and Nathan and Laura were beginning to understand why. "This isn't random," Nathan said after a moment of silence. "This is adaptation. Their bodies are responding to the environment in ways we never thought possible." Laura nodded slowly. But at what cost? If this keeps going unchecked. She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought aloud. They both knew the implications. Evolution wasn't always kind. For every advantage gained, there could be consequences far worse. Already, they'd heard whispers of settlers whose bones grew uncontrollably, piercing organs and causing agonizing deaths. Whatever was happening here wasn't just fascinating science. It was dangerous. Just then, the door to the lab slid open with a hiss. A young man stepped inside, his face pale and sweat dripping down his forehead. "Dr. Nathan," he stammered, clutching his side. "It's Jake. Something's wrong with him." Nathan exchanged a glance with Laura. Without a word, they grabbed their medical kits and followed the messenger out into the corridor. As they hurried toward the infirmary, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental and potentially catastrophic. When they arrived, Jake lay motionless on a cot, his breathing shallow. His skin was cold to the touch, and beneath it, unnatural ridges protruded along his arms and legs. A nurse explained that he'd collapsed during routine maintenance outside the dome. No one understood what was happening to him, or how to stop it. Laura immediately began running tests, her movements quick yet precise. Nathan stayed by Jake's side, watching helplessly as the young man groaned in pain. Whatever was coursing through Jake's body, it was relentless. Within hours, the truth became undeniable. Jake's unbreakable skeleton was killing him. As the night wore on, Nathan and Laura worked tirelessly to uncover answers. But deep down, they both feared they were too late. Not just for Jake, but for everyone on HFY 7.